The great hall of Verath Prime was silent. 1,000 seats rose in circles around the central platform, and every seat was filled. Diplomats, warlords, scientists, and governors from across the Dominion sat still as stone, watching the holographic star map spin slowly in the air above them. Grand Arbiter Jolvan stood at the center. He was tall and thin, with dark green scales covering his entire body, and eyes that glowed like 2 drops of liquid gold. He had ruled the Galactic Dominion for nearly 300 years. Under his leadership, more than 400 species had been brought into the fold. Some came willingly, most did not. The Centennial Expansion Decree is now in session, Jolvan said, his voice low and sharp like the scraping of metal. As is tradition, we named the next targets for integration. The star map shifted. Red dots appeared across it, each one marking a world that had already been claimed. There were hundreds of them, scattered across the galaxy like drops of blood. Then a single new dot appeared, blinking gold. Sol system, Jolvan read from the floating data beside the star. 3rd planet, local name Earth, dominant species Homo sapiens. He tapped the air, and a report expanded before the hall. Images of Earth appeared, blue oceans, green forests, cities glowing at night, and then the data about its people. Pre-tier civilization, Jolvan continued. No faster-than-light travel, no energy shielding, no unified planetary government. The species is fractured into nearly 200 separate political territories. They fight among themselves constantly. Lifespan is short, bodies are fragile, no natural weapons, no telepathy, no hive coordination. He paused and looked up at the assembly. Threat level, negligible. Laughter rippled through the hall, soft at first, then louder. A species that had not even left its own star system, that still used chemical rockets and split atoms for energy. It was barely worth the fuel it would take to reach them. Fleet Commander Draxus rose from his seat in the upper circle. He was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, with a black armored shell covering his body, and 4 thick arms folded across his chest. His species, the Vraxi, were bred for war. Draxus himself had led the Dominion's extermination fleets for over 6,000 years. He had destroyed the crystal cities of Fira. He had broken the telepathic mind-weavers. He had never lost a single campaign. "I will take this one," Draxus said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "My 9th fleet is already restocked. We can be in their system within 90 planetary rotations." Jolvan nodded. Standard absorption protocol. And just like that, the fate of 8 billion human beings was decided in less time than it took to pour a glass of water. The council moved on to other business. Earth was already forgotten, but not by everyone. In the lower rows of the hall, a small figure sat quietly, watching everything. Her name was Yanara, and she was a Caliph, a fox-like species with silver fur, large amber eyes, and a long tail that she kept wrapped around her waist. Her world had been conquered by the Dominion 40 years ago. She had been young then. Now she served as a cultural analyst, assigned to study target species before invasions. It was considered unimportant work. Nobody ever read her reports. As the council session ended and the crowds began to leave, Yanara remained in her seat. She pulled up her personal datapad and opened the file on Earth. The scouting probes had collected an enormous amount of data. Radio transmissions, visual broadcasts, digital signals. Most of it was noise. But buried in that noise was something that made her ears press flat against her skull. She began with the music. Strange, powerful sounds that made her chest feel tight. She moved on to the visual recordings. Soldiers running into fire, cities burning, bombs falling, people screaming, crying, dying. And then, always, someone standing back up again. Someone rebuilding. Someone singing in the ashes. She watched a recording of a single human standing in front of a line of metal war machines, refusing to move. She watched humans strap themselves to rockets and launch into the emptiness of space with nothing but faith and mathematics to guide them. She watched them split the fundamental forces of nature and immediately turn that knowledge into the most destructive weapon their world had ever seen. On themselves. Yanara's hands were shaking. She had studied dozens of species before their absorption. She had read about their cultures, their wars, their art. Most species fought when they had to. Some were aggressive. A few were even dangerous. But none of them were like this. None of them had this strange, terrifying relationship with violence and survival. This constant cycle of destruction and rebuilding. This absolute refusal to stay down. She pulled up the scouting report again. Threat level, negligible. The report had measured their ships, their weapons, their technology. And by those standards, the assessment was correct. Earth had nothing that could challenge a Dominion fleet. Their most powerful weapons were crude nuclear devices. Their fastest ships could barely reach the next planet in their own system. On paper, they were helpless. But Yanara was not looking at their technology. She was looking at their eyes. In every recording, every image, every broadcast, she saw the same thing. A fire that did not go out. A stubbornness that went beyond logic. These creatures did not fight because they calculated they could win. They fought because something deep inside them simply would not allow them to stop. She closed the file and sat alone in the empty hall for a long time. Meanwhile, on Earth, a woman named Dr. Elena Vargas was sitting at her desk in a radio astronomy facility in Puerto Rico. It was late, and she was tired. The screens in front of her showed the usual noise of the cosmos. Background radiation, pulsar signals, the distant hum of old stars. Then, something changed. A tight, focused beam of energy appeared on her screen. It was aimed directly at the sun. It lasted only a few seconds before disappearing. But in those seconds, Elena's heart nearly stopped. She ran the data through every filter she had. The signal was artificial. And it was not from Earth. She grabbed her phone and called her supervisor. Then she called 3 other observatories. By morning, the signal was confirmed by 2 of them before it vanished entirely. The governments were quietly notified. Within a week, a very small group of very powerful people knew the truth. Something was coming. But they did not know what. They did not know when, and they had no idea that on the other side of the galaxy, a fleet of warships that had never known defeat was already turning its guns toward their small blue world. And in the silence between the stars, Yanara sat in her quarters aboard the Dominion flagship and whispered to herself. They gave a threat level of negligible. Did anyone actually read what these creatures have done to each other? Nobody answered. The ship moved on. The Dominion flagship Inevitability was the largest warship ever built. It stretched nearly 12 kilometers from bow to stern, and its hull was covered in weapons that could crack a moon in half. Inside, it carried enough soldiers to invade a continent. It had been the last thing 100 civilizations had ever seen. Now it moved silently through the black emptiness of space, pointed toward a small yellow star that the beings living near it called the Sun. Yanara had requested a private briefing with Fleet Commander Draxus and his second-in-command, Admiral Corvan. It had taken her 3 days to get the meeting approved. Cultural analysts did not usually speak directly to fleet commanders, but Yanara had insisted, and eventually Corvan, who was known for being more patient than his superior, had agreed. The briefing room was cold and dark, lit only by the glow of the holographic display table at its center. Draxus sat in an oversized chair, his forearms resting on the armrests like fallen trees. Corvan stood nearby, tall and lean, with the pale blue skin and silver eyes of his species. Where Draxus was brute force, Corvan was a blade. He had won more campaigns through planning than through firepower. "Make it quick," Draxus said. "I have an invasion to plan." Yanara placed her datapad on the table and activated the display. The room filled with images of Earth. "I have completed my cultural analysis of the target species," she said. "I believe the threat assessment is dangerously incomplete." Draxus let out a low grunt that might have been a laugh. "They throw metal tubes into the sky and call it a space program. What could possibly be dangerous about them?" "Not their technology," Yanara said. "Their nature." She played the first recording. It was a speech from a human war leader, a man called Churchill. He spoke of fighting on beaches, in fields, in streets, in hills. He spoke of never surrendering. His voice shook with something that Yanara had learned was called defiance. Draxus watched without expression. Yanara played more. She showed them soldiers from a conflict called World War II charging into walls of gunfire. She showed them the siege of a city called Stalingrad, where humans fought building by building, room by room, for months, through freezing cold and starvation, and refused to give up. She showed them a group of humans called the Spartans, who fought to the last warrior against an army many times their size, knowing they would die. She showed them the atomic bomb. "They discovered the fundamental energy of matter itself," Yanara said quietly. "And the first thing they did with it was build a weapon. And the second thing they did was use it on their own kind." The room was silent. "In their recorded history," Yanara continued, "humans have fought over 15,000 wars. They have killed billions of their own people. They have developed poisons, diseases, and machines specifically designed to destroy each other in the most efficient ways possible. And after every war, every disaster, every collapse, they rebuild. They always rebuild." She showed them a recording of a human with no legs running a race on metal blades. She showed them cities that had been flattened by bombs, now standing again with towers that touched the clouds. She showed them a grainy recording of humans walking on their own moon, using computers less powerful than the calculator on Draxus's desk. Korvan leaned forward. His silver eyes were sharp. "What is the purpose of this presentation?" he asked. "You are telling us they are violent. We already knew that. Many species are violent." "No," Yanara said. "Many species are aggressive. Humans are something different. They do not fight only when cornered. They fight when they choose to. They fight for ideas, for flags, for songs, for people they have never met. They will walk into certain death if they believe the cause is worth it. And here is what truly frightens me." She changed the display. Now the room filled with paintings. Music began to play. Soft, aching, beautiful sounds that seemed to press against the walls. "They create art from suffering," Yanara said. "No other species in the Dominion archives does this at the scale humans do. They write stories about loss. They compose music from grief. They paint beauty from horror. This is not a sign of weakness. This is a sign of a species that has learned to turn pain into fuel. They do not break under pressure. They transform." Draxus was quiet for a long moment. Then he slammed one of his fists on the table. "Enough. They are clever animals with loud voices. My fleet has broken species that could move stars with their minds. These creatures cannot even leave their own system. We will crush them like every other world." He stood and left the room. The door sealed behind him. Korvan did not move. He stared at the display, where a human painting of a starry night sky still glowed in the darkness. "What happens," he said slowly, "when you corner a species that has never stopped fighting?" Yanara had no answer for him. After she left, Korvan sat alone in the briefing room for a long time. Then he opened his personal terminal and loaded the Dominion's standard invasion simulation program. He entered the data for Earth: population, geography, climate, estimated military strength. He used standard Dominion ground tactics and ran the simulation. The invasion failed. He frowned and doubled the number of ground forces. He ran it again. It failed again. The problem was not the initial landing. The Dominion would win every major battle. Their technology was simply too advanced. The problem was what came after. The simulation showed that humans would not surrender after their armies fell. They would scatter into mountains, forests, deserts, and cities. They would fight with whatever they had. Rocks, knives, bare hands. The resistance would never end. The projected casualty rate for Dominion ground forces was unlike anything Corvan had ever seen. He stared at the screen and muttered, "What in the void are these things?" Far away, on the small blue planet that did not yet know it had been sentenced to death, a world was quietly changing. Dr. Elena Vargas had not slept in 4 days. The signal she had detected had been confirmed, analyzed, and classified at the highest level of secrecy. She sat in a room deep underground with a group of scientists and military officers staring at data that should not exist. A man named General Marcus Webb stood at the front of the room. He was broad and gray-haired, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had spent 30 years preparing for threats, but never one like this. "The signal was a targeted scan of our star," Dr. Vargas explained. "Based on the energy pattern, it came from something artificial, something very far away, and it is moving toward us." "How long?" Webb asked. "Based on the trajectory data, roughly 80 days. The room went cold. Webb picked up a phone. Within hours, a protocol that had been buried in classified files for decades was activated. It was called Blackthorn, and it was designed for one purpose: to prepare humanity for contact with something from beyond the stars. Scientists were pulled from universities. Engineers were pulled from laboratories. Generals and admirals were pulled from their commands. All of them were taken to secure facilities around the world and told the same thing: something is coming. We do not know what. We do not know why. But we need to be ready. And in the deepest corridors of the Galactic network, where signals traveled through hidden channels that the Dominion did not know existed, a message passed between shadows. A network of conquered species, survivors who had hidden and waited for generations, received a single piece of information. The Dominion was heading for a new world, a world called Earth. The collective of shadows listened, and they began to watch. 60 days before the fleet arrived, the world changed forever. It began with whispers. Governments that had hated each other for generations were suddenly talking in private. Military leaders who had spent their careers pointing weapons at each other were now sitting at the same tables, looking at the same data, and feeling the same cold weight in their stomachs. The old arguments did not disappear. The old wounds did not heal. But for the first time in human history, every nation on Earth looked up at the sky and saw the same thing: a threat that did not care about borders. The Blackthorn Protocol expanded. Secret facilities on every continent buzzed with activity. Scientists worked in shifts, sleeping on cots beside their equipment. Engineers tested and rebuilt and tested again. Soldiers trained for a war they could barely imagine. And, at the center of it all, a woman named Adora Obi held the fractured world together with nothing but her voice. President Obi had been born in Lagos, Nigeria. She had risen through diplomacy, negotiation, and a stubbornness that her colleagues compared to stone. She had been elected President of the United Nations General Assembly 2 years earlier, and until now, the position had been mostly ceremonial. Now, it was the most important job on Earth. She moved between governments like a needle pulling thread. When the Americans wanted to launch missiles into space immediately, she calmed them. When the Chinese demanded sole control of the response, she refused. When smaller nations feared they would be left out of the planning, she brought them in. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She simply looked people in the eye and told them the truth. "If we fight each other now," she said in a closed session with the Security Council, "we die divided." And no one in the stars will remember any of our flags. Meanwhile, Dr. Elena Vargas and a global team of scientists were working on something that would change everything. Using the signal data they had captured, they began mapping the frequency patterns of the approaching fleet's communications. It took 3 weeks, 4 supercomputers, and the combined knowledge of every radio astronomer on the planet. But they cracked it. They found the Galactic Open Channel. It was like discovering a radio station that the entire galaxy was tuned into. Every species, every world, every ship in Dominion space used this frequency for official declarations, announcements of conquest, and broadcasts of surrender. It was the Dominion's loudest voice, and now Earth could speak on it. General Webb wanted to use it to send a warning, something that would make the approaching fleet think twice. President Obi shook her head. "Before we show them what we can do," she said, "we show them who we are." She gathered a small team, writers, poets, historians, scientists, soldiers, people from every continent and every walk of life. Together, in a bunker deep below the Swiss Alps, they wrote a single message. It took 4 days. Every word was chosen with care. Every sentence was debated, shaped, and polished until it was exactly right. On the 45th day before the fleet's estimated arrival, Earth spoke to the galaxy for the first time. The message was broadcast not just to the approaching fleet, but to the entire Galactic Open Channel. Every receiver in Dominion space picked it up. Every world, every ship, every station heard the same words at the same time. A species that had never been heard before suddenly filled the silence with a voice that shook the stars. The message said, "To the fleet approaching our world, and to all civilizations who can hear this, we are the humans of Earth. We know you are coming. We know what you intend. We have studied your signal, and we understand. We are not part of your wars. We did not ask for your attention. But now that we have it, hear us clearly. We are a species that crawled out of caves and ice ages. We survived plagues that killed half our number. We split the atom and walked on our moon, all while fighting ourselves. We have buried 100 billion of our dead across our short history. And each time we fell, we stood back up. Not because we are strong, because we do not know how to stay down. If you come in peace, you will find no greater friend in the stars. We have music and stories and laughter enough to share with 1,000 worlds. Our doors will open and our hands will reach out. But if you come to take our world, know this. Every city will fight. Every village will fight. Every single one of us will fight. Not because we believe we can win, but because giving up is something our species has never truly learned. We do not make threats. We simply tell you the truth. Earth is not a target. Earth is a promise. Come if you must. We will be ready, and we will still be here when it is over. The message ended, and the galaxy went mad. On Verath Prime, the Dominion's capital, the Council communication systems crashed within hours. Thousands of signals poured in from vassal worlds across the Empire. Species that had been silent for centuries were suddenly asking questions. What is this world? Who are these beings? What does this mean? On the prison world of Keth, where the broken remnants of the Mind Weavers had been held for generations, an old telepath sat up in his cell. He had not spoken in 20 years. Now he closed his eyes and whispered the words of the message to every Mind Weaver on the planet. Within a day, they had passed it to the next world, and the next, and the next. On the shattered remains of Fira, where the crystalline survivors lived in hiding among the ruins of their once beautiful cities, a young crystal singer heard the broadcast through a stolen radio. She played the message back for her people, and for the first time in living memory, the crystals sang a new song. Not a song of mourning, a song of something they had forgotten the word for. Hope. On 100 conquered worlds, enslaved populations huddled around hidden receivers and listened to a species they had never heard of speak words they had never dared to say. The message spread like fire through dry grass. It was copied, translated, whispered, sung, and scratched into walls. The Dominion censors could not stop it. It was everywhere. The collective of shadows, the secret network of resistance fighters that had operated in silence for generations, erupted into activity. Messages flew between cells on dozens of worlds. For the first time, they had a rallying point. For the first time, someone had spoken openly against the Dominion and not been silenced. Aboard the Inevitability, Fleet Commander Draxus listened to the message and laughed. It was a deep rumbling sound that shook the glasses on his table. "Brave little animals," he said. "They bark loud for creatures about to be stepped on." Admiral Corvan stood beside him and said nothing. His silver eyes were fixed on the screen. He was not listening to the words. He was watching the reaction data pouring in from across Dominion space. He could see the numbers. Communication traffic had increased by 800% in the last hour. Vassal species that had not sent a single unauthorized message in decades were now flooding the network. He understood something that Draxus did not. The humans had not just sent a message to the fleet. They had sent a message to the entire galaxy. And the galaxy was listening. In her quarters, Yanara sat on the floor with her tail wrapped tight around her body and tears running down her silver fur. She had heard many things in her life as a cultural analyst. She had studied the last words of dying civilizations. She had translated the surrender pleas of species about to be destroyed. But she had never heard anything like this. She had never heard a species facing annihilation speak not with fear, but with an invitation. "If you come in peace, you will find no greater friend." She pressed her hands against her face and wept. Back on Verath Prime, Grand Arbiter Jolvan sat alone in his chamber, watching the chaos unfold across his empire. Reports of unrest were pouring in from every sector. Vassal species were becoming agitated. Trade was slowing. Questions were being asked that had not been asked in 1,000 years. His golden eyes narrowed to thin slits. He opened the secure channel to Draxus and spoke 4 words. "Glass the planet. Leave nothing." The order went out. The fleet adjusted course. And on Earth, 8 billion people looked up at the stars and waited. They did not know the exact words of the order, but deep in their bones, in that ancient place where instinct lived, they knew what was coming. And something old and fierce began to stir. The order to destroy Earth completely was meant to end the problem. Instead, it made everything worse. Word of the escalation leaked within days. It always did. The Dominion's communication network was vast, and the collective of shadows had spent generations planting listeners in every corner of it. When the order changed from absorption to total planetary destruction, the news spread across the galaxy like poison in a river. And the galaxy reacted exactly as Grand Arbiter Jolvan had feared. On the factory world of Tellus 9, 3 vassal species that had been supplying fuel and ammunition to the Dominion fleets simply stopped. Workers put down their tools and walked away from the assembly lines. When Dominion overseers demanded they return, the workers looked at them with something new in their eyes and said nothing. They just stood there, unmoving. On the shattered remnants of Fira, the crystalline survivors did something far less peaceful. A group of young crystal singers infiltrated the orbital shipyard that the Dominion had built above their ruined world. Using resonance frequencies that only their species could produce, they shattered the power cores of 6 warships under construction. The explosions lit up the sky for 3 days. The Mindweavers, the telepathic species that Draxus had supposedly broken decades ago, revealed that they had not been broken at all. They had been waiting. Now from their prison cells and hiding places across a dozen worlds, they began linking minds again. Quietly at first, then stronger. A web of thoughts stretched across light years, connecting resistance cells that had never been able to communicate before. For the first time, the collective of shadows had a nervous system. The humans said they would still be here when it was over. Let us make sure they are right. Aboard the Inevitability, Draxus received the reports of rebellion with cold fury. Supply lines were breaking. 3 systems had gone silent. Pirate fleets aligned with the collective were attacking Dominion transports in hit-and-run strikes, disappearing before the warships could respond. For the first time in 6,000 years, Draxus was forced to split his fleet. He sent half of his ships back to suppress the rebellions, keeping the other half for the assault on Earth. It was still an overwhelming force by any galactic standard. 500 warships, 2 million soldiers, enough firepower to burn the surface of a planet to glass. But it was half of what he had started with, and that fact was not lost on Corvan. "We should reconsider," the Admiral said, as they reviewed the fleet disposition. "The strategic situation has changed." "Nothing has changed," Draxus growled. "We destroy the planet, the rebellions lose their symbol, and order is restored." Corvan said nothing more. But that night he did something he had never done before. He opened a hidden channel and contacted Yanara. She answered immediately, as if she had been waiting. "I have run every simulation," Corvan told her. "Even with half the fleet, we will win in orbit. Their ships are primitive. Their weapons cannot penetrate our shields. But on the ground," he paused, "the projections show that we would lose a soldier for every square meter of that planet. They will fight in every building, every tunnel, every forest. They will strap explosives to themselves and walk into our formations. They will not stop. I have commanded invasions for 200 years. I have never seen projections like this." Then she made a decision that would change her life forever. "I am sending you a data package," she said. "Do not open it. Forward it to the following frequency." She gave him a string of numbers. It was a frequency that did not exist on any Dominion record. It was the frequency that Earth's Blackthorn team had been monitoring since they cracked the Galactic open channel. Corvan stared at her. "You are asking me to commit treason. I am asking you to do what is right." He was quiet for a long time. Then he forwarded the package. Yanara's data package arrived on Earth like a gift from the heavens. It contained everything: shield frequencies, weapon cooldown cycles, armor compositions, command structures, communication encryption keys. It was the complete technical blueprint of the Dominion's military. General Webb nearly fell out of his chair. Within hours, every major laboratory and military facility on Earth had a copy. And then humanity did what it did best. It adapted. Engineers who had been struggling to understand the alien signal data suddenly had a key to unlock it. Scientists who had been guessing at the nature of alien technology now had exact specifications. Factories that had been building conventional weapons were given new designs overnight. The speed of it stunned even Yanara, who watched from the Inevitability through intercepted Earth communications. She had expected months, perhaps years. These creatures did it in weeks. In 43 days, human scientists reverse-engineered the basic principles of Dominion energy shielding and built crude but functional versions. They were ugly. They were unstable. They overheated after 20 minutes of continuous use. But they worked. In 38 days, engineers adapted the shield technology into directed energy weapons. They were mounted on trucks, on ships, on modified fighter jets. They did not have the range or power of Dominion weapons, but they could punch through Dominion armor at close range. In 29 days, the world's nuclear arsenals were reconfigured. Warheads were pulled from their missiles and rebuilt with modified detonation patterns designed to overload Dominion shields at the specific frequencies Yanara had provided. Submarines carrying these weapons dispersed into every ocean on Earth and went silent. General Webb coordinated the global military response with the grim efficiency of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for the worst. Every jet, every tank, every soldier on Earth was repositioned. Cities were quietly fortified. Evacuation plans were drawn up and discarded, and drawn up again. Civilian volunteers numbered in the hundreds of millions. And through it all, President Obi held the world together. She appeared on screens across the planet, calm and steady, and told the truth. "Something is coming," she said. "We do not know if we will survive, but we will face it together, and we will face it standing." The world did not panic. There was fear, yes. There was grief and anger and sadness. People held their families close. They prayed in churches and mosques and temples. They sat in parks and watched the sunset. They told each other stories. They laughed. They wept. But they did not break. 60 days after the message was sent, the Dominion fleet entered the Sol system. Earth's deep space sensors, now enhanced with alien technology, tracked them as they passed Jupiter. 500 warships, moving in perfect formation, their hulls dark against the stars. General Webb stood in the command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains and watched the display. Red dots moved steadily inward. He picked up a communication device and spoke to every military unit on the planet. "This is it," he said. "Whatever happens in the next few days, know that every single person on this planet is proud of you. Fight hard, fight smart, and do not let them forget us." On the inevitability, Draxus watched Earth grow larger on his view screen. A small, blue, beautiful world. He felt nothing. He had seen beautiful worlds before. He had burned them all. Then his communication officer turned to him with a strange look on her face. "Commander, we are receiving another transmission from the planet." Draxus waved his hand. "Play it." It was not a message this time. There were no words. Instead, the speakers filled with sound. Music. Human music. 1,000 songs layered together, from every culture and every age. War drums, trumpets, violins, voices raised in defiance, hymns sung in burning cities, anthems roared by crowds of millions. The sound of a species that had faced the end before, and had always, always chosen to sing. The music washed through the flagship like a wave. Soldiers stopped in the corridors and listened. Officers paused at their stations. In the engine rooms and weapons bays and barracks, 2 million Dominion troops heard the voice of a world that refused to be silent. In a narrow bunk near the lower decks, a young Dominion soldier from a vassal species sat on his bed and listened. He had been taken from his homeworld as a child and raised to fight for the Dominion. He had never known anything but obedience. He had never questioned an order. Now, for the first time in his life, he hesitated. And outside the viewports, growing larger with every passing hour, Earth waited. Small, blue, defiant, ready. The Battle of Sol began at dawn, though dawn was a meaningless word in space. The Dominion fleet spread out in a wide crescent formation above the blue curve of Earth. 500 warships darkening the sky like a steel curtain. From the command bridge of the inevitability, Draxus gave the order to advance, and the fleet moved inward with the slow, heavy certainty of a hammer falling. Earth struck first. From orbit, a swarm of kinetic kill vehicles that had been launched weeks earlier and hidden among the planet's satellites came alive all at once. They were simple things. No energy weapons, no alien technology, just dense metal rods accelerated to enormous speeds by gravity and rocket fuel. They hit the forward line of Dominion ships like a wall of invisible fists. Shields flared. 2 smaller warships buckled and broke apart. The rest pushed through, but Draxus felt something he had not felt in 6,000 years. Surprise. Then the nuclear weapons came, modified warheads, tuned to the exact frequencies Yanara had provided, detonated in waves against the fleet's shields. The shields held, but they flickered. Power systems strained. 3 more ships fell out of formation with overloaded generators. From the surface, modified fighter jets screamed into the upper atmosphere, carrying the crude energy weapons that human engineers had built in less than 2 months. They were outmatched in every measurable way. Slower, weaker, more fragile, but they came in numbers that the Dominion had not expected, and they fought with a recklessness that no simulation had predicted. Pilots who knew they would not survive flew directly into Dominion formations, firing until their weapons melted, then ramming their burning aircraft into enemy hulls. For every human ship destroyed, 10 more took its place. The sky above Earth turned into a storm of light and fire and metal. Draxus watched the battle data with growing disbelief. His fleet was winning. Of course it was winning. The technology gap was enormous. Human weapons were primitive by galactic standards. Their shields lasted minutes before failing. Their ships were fragile. On paper, this should have been over in hours. But the humans did not seem to know that. They kept coming, wave after wave. When their jets were destroyed, they launched missiles from the ground. When the missiles ran out, they fired repurposed satellites. When the satellites were gone, they launched anything they could put into the sky. The casualty rate was horrific, but the attacks never stopped. Draxus lost 37 ships in the first 12 hours. It was more than he had lost in the last 1,000 years combined. He ordered the ground invasion. Draught ships descended through the burning atmosphere and landed on 6 continents simultaneously. 2 million Dominion soldiers poured out onto the soil of Earth, armed with energy weapons and armored in plating that could stop a tank round. They expected resistance. They expected a fight. They were not prepared for what they found. Every city fought. Not just the soldiers. Everyone. In the ruins of a European capital, an old man with a hunting rifle fired from a shattered window until his ammunition ran out. Then threw bricks. In a South American jungle, teenagers used homemade drones to drop explosives on Dominion patrols. In an African city, engineers rigged the entire electrical grid to overload, sending massive power surges through the streets and frying Dominion communication equipment. In an Asian megacity, millions of civilians formed human chains to block intersections while resistance fighters attacked from the rooftops. Farmers fought. Teachers fought. Doctors fought. Children as young as 12 ran messages between resistance cells through tunnels and sewers. A blind musician in a bombed-out concert hall played a piano while soldiers fought and died around him, and the music drifted out through the broken walls and into the streets. And somehow, impossibly, people fought harder when they heard it. Draxus lost more soldiers in 72 hours on Earth than in his entire career. The reports from the ground commanders were all the same. The humans would not stop. They did not surrender when surrounded. They did not flee when outnumbered. They fought from buildings, from rubble, from holes in the ground. They set traps. They ambushed patrols. They attacked supply lines. They fought in daylight and in darkness and in the rain and through their own tears. Corvan's simulations had been exactly right. On the 4th day, Draxus made a decision that burned in his chest like acid. He ordered a retreat to orbit. The ground invasion had failed. The cost was too high. He would fall back on the original order and glass the planet from above. It would waste the resources that absorption would have provided, but it would end this. His remaining ships formed up above the planet. Weapons locked onto the surface. Draxus opened his mouth to give the command. And then the sky tore open. Faster-than-light signatures erupted across the Sol system like a chain of explosions. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Ships of every shape and size dropped out of the void and into real space. They were not Dominion ships. The collective of shadows had come. They were a ragged fleet, Firin crystal ships that hummed with resonance energy. Mindweaver vessels held together by thought and willpower. Old warships from species that had been conquered generations ago, pulled from hiding places and repaired with whatever was available. Pirate frigates, stolen transports. Civilian ships with weapons bolted to their hulls. They were mismatched, uncoordinated, and held together by nothing but fury and hope. But there were hundreds of them, and they were not afraid. Yanara's voice filled every channel, broadcast on every frequency. Fleet Commander Draxus, you wanted to know what happens when you corner a species that never stops fighting. Now you know. And now you know what happens when the rest of us remember how. The rebel fleet attacked from above, while Earth struck from below. Draxus found himself caught between two forces, his fleet battered and his soldiers bleeding on the ground beneath him. His supply lines were gone. Half his fleet was on the other side of the galaxy chasing rebellions. His shields were weakened, his soldiers were shaken. For the first time in 6,000 years, Fleet Commander Draxus gave the order to retreat. The inevitability turned away from Earth. The remaining Dominion ships followed, limping back into the darkness of deep space. The sky above Earth, which had been filled with fire and death for 4 days, slowly went quiet. On the surface, people looked up. At first, no one believed it. The guns fell silent, and still no one moved. Then, in a city somewhere in Europe, someone started cheering. The sound spread. It jumped from street to street, city to city, continent to continent. A roar of voices that circled the entire planet. They were still here. In the days that followed, the pieces began to fall into place. The Dominion did not collapse immediately, but it cracked in ways that could not be repaired. Grand Arbiter Jolvan faced open revolt on Verath Prime, as vassal species that had been obedient for centuries suddenly found their voices. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for millennia began to fracture, and at the center of every crack was the same word: Earth. Admiral Korvan did not retreat with Draxus. He stayed behind in the Sol system, alone in a single ship. He opened a communication channel to the surface, and requested something that no Dominion officer had ever requested in the history of the Empire: permission to speak. General Webb granted it, and for the first time, a Dominion officer spoke to a species not as a conqueror, but as an equal. President Obi addressed the galaxy once more. Her voice was tired, but steady, and it carried across the same open channel that had broadcast humanity's first message. "We meant what we said," she told the listening stars. "If you come as friends, you will find no greater friend. That offer stands for everyone, even those who came as enemies, especially those who came as enemies, because we know what it is like to fight, and we know what it is like to choose peace. The door is open." Yanara was granted asylum on Earth. She arrived on a shuttle that landed in a field outside a small European city, and she stepped onto the grass with trembling legs. The sun was warm. The air smelled like flowers and rain. She walked through the city streets slowly, looking at everything with wide amber eyes. She saw children playing in a park, laughing and chasing each other. She heard music drifting from an open window, soft and gentle, a melody played on an instrument she did not recognize. She watched an old man sitting on a bench, tossing pieces of bread to small birds that gathered at his feet. The man looked up and saw her, this strange silver-furred alien standing on his sidewalk. And he smiled, just smiled, and nodded, and went back to feeding his birds. Yanara stood there for a long time, tears running down her fur, and she finally understood. She understood why her analysis had terrified Korvan. She understood why the simulations had failed. She understood why the message had set the galaxy on fire. It was not the weapons. It was not the stubbornness. It was not even the refusal to surrender. It was this ordinary, impossible, beautiful life that humans built between the wars. The music, the laughter, the old man and his birds. They did not just survive. They lived. Fully, deeply, stubbornly lived. And they would fight to the death to protect the right to keep doing so. That was what the Dominion had never understood. That was what made humans dangerous. Not their capacity for war, but their capacity for everything else. Dr. Elena Vargas stood at her telescope that evening. The same telescope that had picked up the first signal all those weeks ago. The sky above was clear and full of stars. She pointed the telescope outward, past the moon, past the planets, into the deep black where the galaxy waited. Somewhere out there, species she had never met were saying a word they had not spoken in centuries. Hope. Somewhere out there, an empire was crumbling. Somewhere out there, the universe was changing. She smiled. The night was quiet. The stars were bright. She whispered into the dark, "We're still here."